Hey everyone, we are up here in Franklin, Tennessee today with Williamson County historian Rick Warwick. One thing I think is really interesting about Middle Tennessee is today, a lot of people focus on the small towns, which are kind of big towns in a way, but you have Columbia, you have Franklin, you have Murfreesboro. And there's a lot of focus on the history of those small towns, but really a lot of the history of Middle Tennessee is the history of rural communities. And so we're here today to talk to Rick about an institution of the rural community, which is the country store. So Rick, can you tell us more about the history of the country store?
You could say every community, and of course, Williamson County was made up of several districts, but every little community in those districts at the crossroads was at least one store, and sometimes two and three and maybe four. And those in early times, almost the country store was the place where the post office was before they had a rural delivery. So people would come, probably not every day because they didn't get that much mail, but they would come at least once a week to check for their mail. They also came, that was the time, women brought their chickens and their eggs and their butter to exchange, to barter for sugar, flour, baking soda, coffee, things that they didn't grow on the farm. So basically, the country store was the hub of the community. Almost all these communities had at least one church. They usually had a school, maybe one blacksmith shop, sometimes two, depending, or maybe some little industry was there. And but the store was really the heart. It was men particularly liked to go there and sit around the pot-bellied stove and exchange gossip and talk about politics or religion, or it was just the nerve center of every little community. And Williamson County was full of little country stores, and today they have just about all gone. I'm thinking Fox store out at Bending Chestnut is holding on. Jewel Anderson, her grandfather started that store, I think, in 1923. Burwood has Huff's store, which is right there on Carter's Creek Pike, and the Huffs it was the Aiken store before that, so it goes back probably to about maybe 1915 or something, but I don't think the Huffs got it until maybe the late 20s or early 30s, maybe early 30s. And then over at Thompson Station, Reagan had a store there, several little stores there, and today there's not a store at Thompson Station. You go over to Bethesda, and of course there were two or three stores there. You go on down on Cross Keys, Trice had a store right there. Down on Flat Creek, there was one, and it's still there, and I'll have to get you a photograph of it, but it was called, it was on Giles Hill Road, and it was, it's got the funniest name. It's a long building. He would go to Nashville and buy appliances and anything and have it there to sell. Oh gosh, what was its name? Well, I'll come back to that. And then you go over to Allisona, there was a store. You go on Arnold Road, the old Arnold Smithson store. Paytonsville, there was at least two stores there. Going on at Harpeth, there was a store right there.
So something that I think is really interesting about the country store is that it's kind of the connection between these rural communities and larger kind of manufacturing influences around the country and even around the world, because you have the manufacturing that might not be happening in these rural communities, but increasingly you've got technology, you've got transportation, so things that might be manufactured in, say, like Chicago or New York City, that's easier to get in a place like a rural community in Williamson County. I think that's really interesting about the country store. So it's kind of like this connection point between someone who might be living on a farm in rural Middle Tennessee and then manufacturing hubs in the Northeast.
Well, in Williamson County, all the roads leading to Franklin were turnpikes. And so that deterred people from coming into Franklin often to shop. And so these country stores were at almost every crossroads in the county. And it was those owners were the ones that made the trip to Nashville to buy wholesale, and they would buy anything from fencing to anything that you'd need. They would buy it in Nashville and bring it to the country store. Most people in the country didn't have transportation. They had a mule and a wagon and a buggy maybe. And then until automobiles came in, they very seldom came to Franklin except maybe to come to pay their taxes. So these country stores were really the window to the outside world, because it taught, coca-cola came into being around the turn of the 20th century. And patent medicine was sold open over the counter at these country stores. The main probably things they sold were things like coal oil. Then when cars came in, every country store had a gas tank that usually you had to pump up by hand into the glass globe and then drain it into the car. Because the electricity didn't come to rural Williamson County until the 1940s. So they were really at the place, if you needed anything, particularly you're in Fairview, or you're at Leaper's Fork, or you're at Grassland, or you're in Flat Creek somewhere, you didn't come to town. But the country store was your connection to getting things that were considered modern. Their basic things they sold would have been flour, meal, sugar, coffee, things that the farm couldn't produce or didn't produce. Of course, a lot of people had corn, and they'd take it to the grist mill and have it made into cornmeal to take the wheat and make flour. But coffee and sugar was not available, on the farm. In most of these country stores was also the U.S. Post Office. Usually the guy who ran the store also was the postmaster for that district, and every 4 or 5 miles there was a country store and there was a post office. It was a political thing. Usually whoever was president appointed the postmasters in these, so if the Republicans are in, all the postmasters were Republicans, and if they were out, then the Democrats got a shot at it. So that was the importance, I think, of the country store.
What do you think was like the heyday of the country store? Because of course you have these merchants, grocers, stores popping up around Middle Tennessee, pretty much as soon as people were settling here. And then of course we talked about, around the turn of the century, you have post offices and things like that in these stores. But even into like the 1940s, you said, there's no electricity, and these stores are still really central to these rural communities. So what do you think?
Well, the mid 20th century would probably be the key point. Interesting, in Williamson County, I've found that, in the 1920s and 30s and 40s, during what we call the Prohibition, was between 1920 and 1933, moonshining was a big operation, and the country store was usually the provider for the sugar that the moonshiners need.
Now, did you grow up here?
No.
Okay.
I grew up in Anderson County.
Okay. I didn't grow up.
Above East Tennessee.
So is that?
But I feel like I did. I am so fortunate. I came just at the right time. I came in 1970, and I've always had a real love of old people, because they're the ones that have the knowledge that I'm interested in collecting. And when I went to Hillsborough in 1971, everybody in that village were retired. There wasn't any children in the village. All the houses were occupied by old people, and it was so funny to see them. When on the first of the month, when the Social Security check came, they all sitting on the porch waiting for the postman to come, and they were dressed and ready to go. And as soon as the mail was in the box, they grabbed it, got in the car, and came to the bank to deposit the Social Security. That was before direct deposit, of course. And so I made it a point to visit every one of them, and I got good stories about their life, their ancestors' lives. And so you couldn't do that today, because when they died, the stories died. But that was my, I guess, my legacy to a window into the 21st century is I was fortunate to interview people who were born in the late 19th century and had secondhand information on the Civil War or early settling of this county.
Yeah.
So
I'll ask you one more question.
Sure.
So when we first started talking, you mentioned rural mail delivery.
Yeah.
And I think, this is one of those things that people really take for granted, is that you can get mail delivered to your house wherever.
Yeah. That wasn't so until the rural route, RFD 6. That was the rural free delivery. Before that, they had the post office was in Franklin, but there were carriers that left Franklin, and they would take the mail to Hillsboro, and then someone at Hillsboro would take the mail, say, down to Lick Creek, or take it on to Fairview or Fernvale, and then the stores there would distribute the mail. So, and people didn't come every day. Now, they may be because you didn't get the newspapers. If you wanted the national paper, you got it a day late, because they would bring it to Franklin the next day, and then from there they would take it to the store. So some people, if they wanted the news, they had to go often to the store. But most people, there wasn't any, unless your cousin or somebody was writing you from far off, was there any reason to go to the just to pick up the mail?
So this is late, just like 1890s, early 1900s?
No, free delivery didn't come until like 1915, 16.
Okay,
yeah.
Okay.
So that's when they started rural routes, RFD 6, rural free delivery, and I know 6 was Hillsboro, and the mail came here. Usually came here it came by train for many years, and then there was a guy at the post office that met the train, and then they'd bring it to Franklin, and then they would separate it, and then send it out wherever to the country stores, and that's where the people got their mail.
So once mail delivery started, then is the store still the post office? And
no, well, it could be, yeah. No, even that sometimes it was, because sometimes that delivery person operated out of that store.
So today, most country stores, when they still exist, a lot of what they sell is gasoline.
That's it, and quick things, like people coming in buying coffee and cigarettes. Now, like Hillsboro, the Puckett's and Leapers Fork Market now, their main bill is people come in the morning on the way to work, and they stop and get a ham and biscuit and gas up, get their coffee, cold drink, cigarettes, and then they're off.
It's not quite the social.
No, it's not everybody's going to buy groceries. They're going to Kroger's. They're going to Publix, because it's better, it's fresher, and it's cheaper. These country stores, some of that stuff may be on the shelf years before you sell it. Of course, in canned goods, it doesn't matter so much. But a lot of the country stores, like Fox's, they would have like axe handles, crosscut saws, nails. Anything that you needed, you could get it there, because a farmer, instead of coming into town, they go to the country store and get, if they need a plow point, you just go there and get it.
Yeah.
Or a bolt.
It's so interesting, because it is just such a different way of living than a lot of us are used to right now. But I think it's really important to learn about that, that rural and agricultural history of our communities that can be easy to overlook, especially when the evidence or the buildings themselves may not be there, or if they are there, they're being used for something else. So you wouldn't necessarily look at it and see, wow, that's a really great opportunity to learn about the history of this community, because at one point this building was a really central part of everyday life.
Back in the 20s, 30s, 40s, even 50s, the main source of income was farming, and of course tobacco and selling your cattle and hogs in the fall. That was when the money came in, and so these country stores served as a source of credit. And so many times, a lot of country stores went broke because they were too generous in giving credit. But I mean, even out at Fox's store, I was there one day, and some of my old students pulled up and got their gas and went in and signed a ticket. And then at the end of the week, when they get their paycheck, they come in and pay Jewel for whatever they bought that week. And so that's probably the last one. But I mean, I remember back home, there was a whole big case, and those tickets were in these files, and everyone, you had a number, and they'd pull it out and write it, and then you'd sign it that you'd gotten it, and they put it in there, and then it would go on. Either if they were a big farm family that raised tobacco, and of course you didn't sell you tobacco until November or January, or December, January, and so as soon as they got their check, they went to the bank or they took it out to the country store, because most of that check went to pay for the groceries that you'd eaten on all year. So that was a big thing.
Now that would be a great resource to learn about a community's history, is to see those receipts and the
well, I've got books downstairs that's got those they're like, you know, they were kept in day books.
Yeah.
And so you had a name, and so if you came in and got something, they'd put it down, and then when you went at the end of the month or end of the year and you went to pay up, they totaled it up and you paid them. So it was of course with that they had to charge more because it was their money that they had tied up into it. I know a lot of stores went broke because at the beginning of the Depression, people lost their jobs and they didn't have a way to pay their bill. And so if enough people in the community did that, then the store went bankrupt and they closed.
Yeah.
So it's economics on a very simple level.
Yeah. Well, Rick, thank you so much. This has been really great. I feel like I learned a lot. I always have a great time talking to Rick. I always learned so much. And one thing that I hope that you picked up on was our conversation about how Rick started learning about Williamson County's history. And that's just by going out and talking to the older members of the community. I hope that over the next few months through the holidays and into the new year, you'll find some safe ways to talk to the older members of your community or even the older members in your family to learn more about our local history. See you next time.